Hello everyone, we're very sorry for joining late because of some technical problems that are now solved. Thank you for waiting and for joining us now. Thank you for joining for us for the ABC live event series. April is the month when we commemorate the Armenian Genocide. This year marks the 104th anniversary, and our students, alumni, and ABC friends know that this time of year we always organize a series of events for our students, for our community. And this year, among the events that we've already held or are planning to hold still, we're very happy to bring a live lecture to you by Anna Aleksanyan. Anna Aleksanyan is a doctoral candidate from the Clark University, at Clark University. She's specializing in genocide studies with a particular emphasis on the Armenian Genocide. Anna's today talk is part of the emergent research on genocide, which focuses on the particular way women were targeted by and responded to the atrocities. After Anna's talk, we will have a Q&A session, so please do feel free to send your questions to us. We will be happy to respond to them. So thank you, Anna, for your willingness to be part of our series of talks. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Hasmi, for this introduction, and thank you for HBU Virtual College for inviting me for this important, as a part of the April events. It is an honor, and thank you all for joining us today. Now, I titled my talk today, Armenian Genocide, Women Responses to Genocidal Crimes, and because generally my work, my thesis focus on Armenian women responses to genocidal crimes, and Armenians managed to preserve their national traditions, language, and religion, though they were part of the Ottoman Empire and had lived under the rule of the Ottoman government for many centuries. The role for Armenian women, who was the pillar of the Armenian family, the preserver of the language and traditions, and their transferer for the future generations, was essential. And during the genocide, was for men, as you know, were mobilized and killed. Women and children were forced for deportation, and it included not only physical destruction, physical killing, but also non-physical destruction, which meant forced marriages, forced conversion to Islam, and forced denial of self-identity. To be able to rebuild what happened with the Armenian women during the Armenian Genocide and how Armenian women responded to these genocidal crimes, I decided to introduce you a little bit about Ottoman Armenian life before the genocide. And as you see in this screen, I tried to show the different classes of Ottoman Armenians. You see Armenian couple. Sorry. So in these pictures you see Armenian couple from Mersin in 1906. As you see, it's very European style. This couple, they come from very wealthy Armenian family. And from the other side, you see a village Armenian woman from Zeytun. This picture was taken in 1890s, and you see the class difference. So sometimes when people think about Armenian genocide, they think that all Armenians were rich, all Armenians were very well established in the Ottoman Empire, and but there were all classes, and Armenian community in the Ottoman Empire was a live community. They were poor, they were rich, they were merchants, they were, scholars, they were teachers, etc. So, the thing is that in the Ottoman society, we always had this class difference between the rulers and the others. The Turkish authorities or Turkish nation was the ruling nation, and because of that, they always had they had the law in their side. And Armenians, as a Christian minority, Armenian millet, always had to go to deal with the Turkish Ottoman Turkish laws. And during the entire history of Ottoman Armenians, Armenian women were targeted by local Muslim men. They were kidnapped and they were forced married to Kurdish or Turkish authorities or others in different provinces of the Ottoman Empire. But if in 18th century Armenian community was responding to these crimes very passive and even very aggressive towards these women, even they understood that this was not their fault, that they were kidnapped, but they were refusing these women. And those who were kidnapped, they didn't have access back to the Armenian community, because it was also about an honor of Armenian family and male family members.
Also conversion, perhaps?
Also conversion, yes. They forced to convert, and they were bad for the Armenian community. But slowly in 19th century, when Armenian awakening started, this changed, and Armenian intellectuals tried to educate Armenian communities in different Armenian provinces that these women who were targeted, who were violated, who were kidnapped, it's not their fault, and we have to not only protect them, but when it happened, we have to be able to bring them back and to reintegrate them into Armenian society. And talking about Armenian families, we have to mention about Nahabedagan Armenian family structure. Armenians were living together with big families, sometimes 20 people, and it was easy for them to protect family members and to manage also financially the family. And in some Armenian regions, like Mush, they were very traditional, and Armenian women, they didn't have a voice, and they even were keeping this munchk, which was the meaning is that they young Armenian brides could not speak to anyone, especially male members of the family. So, but in the other provinces like Kharpet, late 19th century, Armenian women were going to the American college. They were educated, and they started to go even abroad, and it changed their position.
How about the families? How was the dynamic there? Were they turning into more nuclear families in Harvard, for example?
Yes, and because of modernism and industrialism, also they were moving from villages to big cities, urban, and they becoming more small and small. But this process was very slow, and actually, because of genocide, the traditional Armenian family structure was destroyed completely. But I just choose this picture of Hodor Gyurtsi, Erzurum, Garin Armenians, to just show them that how Armenian families, big Armenian families, were living together. And going back to
Anna, you have to go louder because apparently,
okay. Sorry. And sorry. going back to 19th century Armenian awakening, today I want to share with you the history of Gulizar, a famous Armenian girl who was kidnapped by Musabek, a Kurdish agha from Mush, and Gulizar is her Kurdish name. So she was Armenuhi. She was kidnapped and converted to Islam, and she was forced to live with Musabek for 4 years. And then she escaped and came back to her family. And interestingly, first time, it was in 1889, and first time in the Ottoman history, Armenian community stood together to protect Gulizar from Musabek, and also took him to the court. And surprisingly, they could win the case against Musabek. And interestingly enough, not only Armenians but also local Kurds and Turks remember Gulizar till now. We have Gulo, the song, and Kurds have the same, and also Turks have the same song. And it was not only about Armenian community, it was a victory of women in general in the Ottoman context.
In the legal,
yes, who could protect their honor and who could win in a court. And especially for Armenians, because Armenians were Christians and etc. And here you see Gulizar, and from the other side, when Gulizar came back, there were many Armenian men who wanted to marry her and to start a new life, showing that life continues after this event. And you see, she chooses Moshe Geram, who became a parliament member after 1908 revolution. And Geram also was among those who were in front of the Turkish court. He went there. He was organizing all these Armenian community events to protect Gulizar, and so it was a big victory for Armenians too. And this was pre-genocide event, and which comes to show us that Armenian women were always target when genocide started, these women were unprotected. Most of them never left their village before, and it was the first time in their life that they had to make decisions, and it was they forced to make decisions, and they became they forced to become a head of the family. This is the first time in Armenian history, I would say, that women became a decision makers. And from the very beginning of deportation law, they had to, for example, as many of you may know, Armenians forced to lock their doors, give their property to Turkish authorities, and leave the region. And to give a key of the household, that was a very big responsibility, because they didn't know about the fate of their men, and they had to do this. They had to make this decision. And in the very beginning of the deportation, so I will change the slide. In the very beginning of the deportation, women had to also make decisions regarding to their children and other female members of the family, because local Turks were willing to marry young and rich Armenian girls to have Armenian property also in legal way, and
to convert them, of course, but to have them as their wives. This was also a big decision for women, to go to march with others. Sometimes they were forced to marry to marry a Turk or Kurd, just to save other members of the family. And all these decisions also was made by women. We should keep in mind that Armenian women with elderly and children were walking from Western Armenia, from Armenian highland to Arab desert, and it was thousands and thousands of kilometers without food, without water, any supplies. And so this journey was very, very hard. And during their journey, they were constantly attacked by Teşkilat-ı Mahsusat, the special bandit groups, and also their gendarmeries. And again and again, they had to make their decisions, and they had to immediately decide what they are going to do after this or that attack. Sometimes they were raped, as you know. They were forced to give all their clothes, and they were forced to walk naked 100 kilometers. And interestingly enough, when we speak about, generally we think about Armenian genocide, we think that all women responded in the same way to different crimes, but this is not it. Regarding to their age, their social class, and their education, they were responding in different ways. And this is what I found in my research. Armenian women, for example, from Kharpert, most of them survived because they were educated and they were brave enough to understand, or to understand that what's happening with them, it's not their fault, and they should not, for example, commit suicide when they raped in front of the Armenian community, others. But Meshetiner did, because they could not take this shame. But the most important thing is that these women ended up, those who could survive this journey, ended up in the concentration camps in Deir Zor, Rasulayn, Raqqa. I have a picture of a map. As you can see, this is the deportation map, and the places marked, these red marks of those places where Armenians massacred. This is just to give you a general idea.
And we can go back to this map if people
Yeah.
have questions at the end.
And this is their final destination in the concentration camps, where they were sent to die, not to live, but they didn't know about it. And this is where Armenian women saved Armenian nation, because they did everything to against dehumanization, which was a part of genocidal program, and to protect and save Armenian orphans, and to stay as a human being. This was the most important thing that they did. And this picture was taken by Armin Wegner. And as you can see, they're trying to eat this dead horse. Many died during the journey. Many died in concentration camps, but they were women who would have taken care of these orphans. They lost their own children, but in the middle of desert, when a climate was different from our Armenia, when they didn't know how to make a food, they didn't know how to find the food or water, they would make an environment of household, and interestingly enough, orphans who survived Deir Zor, who survived Rasulullah and Raqqa, they would remember that they could stay alive only because they believed that someone cares about them. Someone who made this environment saying this is our home, and they were just boiling water for these kids, but they would remember this. They would help these women to find a food, and this is how they survived. And this is the most important thing. And there were some men who managed to bribe Turkish authorities, and they were also deported with their families. So, but these men were constantly dehumanized and masculinized, and they lost their authority. And when time came to make a decision, for example, for their children, the most important decisions against was in the shoulders of women, mothers. For example, to save a child or to save other members of the family, sometimes they're forced to just sell their children. And who is going to survive from the family? Who is going to be gone? That was the decision that women made during the genocide. And for mother, that was the most difficult decision to make. And when we go through all these, stories, we understand how important it was that these women could make these decisions. They show their agency, and they could save Armenian nation. So what happened after the war? In 1918, when war was ended, Armenians discovered that many survivors were women and children, but most of them were converted to Islam, and they were living as slaves or as Islamized wives of local Muslims in a Muslim household in the Ottoman Empire. So it was important to save these women and children. And it is very interesting to understand this, the nature of Armenian genocide. We can understand even going through Armenian language, this change. For example, the word Airi in Armenian means widow, and the word word means orphan. And we have another word Vorpevairi, which means a person who lost his or her husband or wife.
By the side of
yeah, but it was equally applied for men and for women before the genocide. But during the genocide and after the genocide, it became only it was referring only for women, because that was the nature of Armenian genocide. Armenian women became orphans, and this was also, they didn't have a family member. I mean, they were unprotected this language change also shows the nature of Armenian genocide.
Can it also be women's association with children as the powerless,
yes,
the way they were rendered through the narrative of genocide at the time?
Exactly. But women is the one who saved the nation, and we have to keep it in mind, because if not Armenian women, if not their agency, if not their courage, Armenian nation could not survive, would not survive. Yes. So I would end here, and if there are questions, I will answer to them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Anna, for this really new breadth of research into Armenian genocide from this gendered perspective. Of course, we hear when we read about Armenian genocide, and it's a relatively well-studied area of our history. we hear about women and we hear
Mhm.
about children, but most of the time we hear about women in these passive roles of, trying to protect their honor by killing themselves, by jumping off the cliffs,
Mhm.
by being raped, by being killed, massacred.
Mhm.
But this is a completely new breath when we see that these women actually had agency. They
Mhm.
could become the decision makers at the
Yes.
time of atrocities when the whole family was in danger.
Mhm.
I perhaps now see if we have questions from the viewers. One question that I have, and I would like you to talk a little bit more on this post-genocidal period,
Mhm.
how this survival actually, the women who were carrying the children from the
Mhm.
from the rapes that they were subjected to, how these women were reintegrated into the society. If you could say a little bit more on that, perhaps.
Yeah, very important question, because it never ends with for Armenian women. It never ended with war, when war was ended. It was continued for some women for entire their life, and because of what you are asking, many women were subject of rape, as you mentioned. They were raped, and many were married and had children from their Muslim husbands. And after the genocide, Armenian and international organizations trying to save them, trying to bring them back and reintegrate them into Armenian society. But it was the most difficult, I think, to deal with the children who were, first of all, according to Ottoman law, these women could not take their children if they were married, like legally, with Muslim men. That child belonged to Muslim family. And some women who lost everything, their families, they nothing left in that world, their children were very important for them, and sometimes they would refuse to come back to Armenian community because they could not take their children with them. Some were carrying children from their rapers, and it was very difficult for them to have that child. We have stories of post-genocide period when women try to kill their children or try to, commit suicide because of their condition. But interestingly, Armenian church was taking care of these kids who were abandoned by their mothers, and they were baptizing them in a church. And they were raising them with other Armenian orphans as Armenians, and
concerned about the number of Armenians.
yeah, also yes. But mostly this was the taboo, let's say, question among Armenians for many years.
Yes, and now it's very good to see this research coming out finally.
Yeah, last decade there were several books and articles written and published
by Vahe Tashcan,
Dernek Mekçoğlu. This is a topic that very important, and I'm very happy that we have a literature on this topic.
Thank you. We have a question from our viewers about your sources. They also saw these pictures. There are several questions about what are the sources you've been using, the archival material, and where are the pictures from?
Most of my pictures, for example, this picture is coming from Karen Yepe archive, Karen Yepe collection, which is at the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute. I should say that the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute has a good collection of pictures and
Mm-hmm.
documents and survivors' testimonies. It's a very good place to go and to do research. But I did my research in different archives. I worked at the AGBU archives of in Paris, Nubarian Library,
yeah.
which is one of the most important archives to study Armenian genocide and pre-genocide life in the Ottoman Empire. Most importantly, we have Aram Andonian collection.
Also at the Nubarian Library?
At the Nubarian Library, which is now half of it online, and you can access it and read if you can read handwritten Armenian. I did my research also at the Armenian Patriarchate in Jerusalem, which has rich materials on the Armenian genocide, especially those materials who were collected by Armenian Patriarchate, Zavender Yehyayan, and it includes court, after the war, it was a court against Young Turks, and we have all these materials, minutes from these courts in the Jerusalem Armenian archives in Jerusalem, and also the important archive is, of course, ARF archives in Boston, which is everyone can go and work, and it's a great resource. And I also used the Father Gergerian archive, which is now online, thanks to Professor Taner Akçam, my professor, my supervisor. Father Gergerian was an orphan who survived genocide, and entire his life he dedicated to collect Armenian genocide materials, and it's a rich resource for those who are interested in this topic in general.
Thanks. And we have another question about what would be next to this research. This already brings to light new information about women, the roles that they took that we never thought that they did. So what would be the next step in the research? What would you advise to scholars that come after you?
I have myself work to do, I guess, but it is important to look at the genocidal event from different angles. For example, this is the social life, let's say, during the Armenian genocide. I go deeper into Armenian community life. I study how Armenian's family was broken and how it was restored, what helped this to happen, etc., etc. But I should mention that in Armenian history, Armenian women missed. I mean, we do not see them in general in Armenian history, and especially in the history of the Armenian genocide. But they were the ones who went through these deportation routes, who were living in concentration camps, who managed to survive and restore Armenian nation. In 2009, I met Professor Vahagan Dadarian. As you know, he is one of the prominent scholars, and he told me, Archigas, I missed that very important part of the Armenian genocide history, and you, he was referring all young scholars, like, you should study this. It is very important, and I agree with him.
Yes. At the time that when he was writing, women's history was not a field as such. It still hadn't established itself, so we can see that we've gone a long way now.
Yeah, and also because Armenian genocide was denied, those scholars who work on Armenian genocide, they tried to prove that this event happened. It had kind of a political shape, but now I think it is important for us to focus on event itself, going deeply into the event and what happened.
And perhaps one last question is that those who left the Ottoman Empire, they were deported or they found themselves in other countries, they were not very positively looking at those who stayed. Did you see any of these attitudes in your research anywhere?
It was
Or
there
how were the people who stayed dealing with these attitudes in the post-genocidal period?
in the those who could manage to go back to their Heidenik, to their Edgate, they were very brave to go back, even and to continue living side by side with perpetrators. As we know, they forced to convert to Islam and to hide their Armenianness, but live among, because it is their Edgate, but they forced to live in that conditions, and in my opinion, it was their home, and most Armenians couldn't go back home because they didn't have the right to go back. They would love to go back, but those who could, I'm not the person to judge.
I was just asking about the attitudes, if you came across them. That was the question.
But regarding to Istanbul Armenians who continue to live in Istanbul, yes, I came across with some. So how you continue to live among these perpetrators, etc. Yes, I can.
And there are a few more other questions coming out now. One is asking, one question is that you talked about reintegration of these women who'd been raped and were carrying Muslim children, Turkish children. So we talked about that, but do you have any information? Do the sources talk at all about the children who were reintegrated, these children that were born as a result of rapes, how they were reintegrated into the society? You talked about orphanages being set up by the church. Was there also other kind of work being done other than the baptism?
They were just newborns, or they were just kids, so they could not know if they had a Muslim father. So they were raised among other Armenian orphans. They had very interesting and very good Armenian names. For example, they were Levons, they were Tigrans, Vartans, and and then they were educated as Armenians. This was the way to. They were not separated and then reintegrated. They were among other orphans also. So Armenian church would take care of them, as they would take care of other Armenian orphans. They were part of Armenian community, as Zaven Yehyayan would say. All these kids belong to Armenian nation, and we have to keep them. We have to save them if we want our nation to survive.
Thank you. And I think this is the last question. Are there any DNA research groups? And I know that there have been, but I'm not sure if you know on this topic anything.
Yes, there is George Arjayan, actually ARF Archives Director. He is doing a great job, and you can find his articles also about this.
Can you say the name again?
George Arjayan. Yes, and yes, because families were separated. Many kids were taken forcibly. They were converted to Islam. They were married, and now they live in Western Armenia. Some of them, in nowadays Turkey, some of them know about their past, know about their grandmothers, and try to find connection, try to find relatives in America or around the globe. And some were very successful to find their relatives, which is,
Thank you. Well, thank you, Anna, very much for this research that you shared with us. We wish you all the luck in the world with finishing your dissertation on such an important and new topic. It really adds to the history of Armenia, to history of the Armenian Genocide in particular. Thank you very much also to those who have been with us. We will have a recording of this, and you can also watch it or refer it to your friends and those who are interested on the topic. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you for invitation. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.